Greetings, comrades! One of the most fascinating things to watch in the news about Russia is the roller coaster ride of the ruble's value. One day it's 120 rubles per dollar, then it's 50, then 113 again, then 80. Today the ruble is one of the world's most volatile currencies. Its exchange rate is constantly fluctuating, Russians are always worried about new shocks, and experts' predictions don't always match what's happening in reality. So why is the ruble so unstable? Is it just because of the current sanctions and isolation? Far from it. After all, over the last century, the ruble has weathered hyperinflation, multiple devaluations, radical reforms, and even overnight currency collapses. But why? Why does the Russian currency find itself in crisis time after time? In this video we'll explore the history of the ruble to understand its vulnerability and how it affects millions of people. All the world's currencies are usually divided into two groups, strong and weak. The strong ones, like the euro, pound sterling and Swiss franc, are currencies of developed, wealthy countries. They all have one thing in common. They're worth a little more than $1, the current world standard. At first glance it seems straightforward. The stronger the currency, the more expensive it is. The weaker the currency, the cheaper it is. The higher the exchange rate to the dollar, the weaker a currency is in terms of purchasing power on the world market. So it's tempting to say that the ruble is weak because Russia is a poor country. But first of all, that's not really true. Russia is one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. Secondly, the Russian ruble is worth 80 rubles per dollar. That's a bit low. But the South Korean won is worth 1,450 per dollar. Is South Korea a poor and unstable country with a terrible economy? Or China, which has purposely kept the yuan relatively weak for 20 years? It's not that simple. Fortunately, this is not an economic channel, and I won't torment you with supply and demand balances, the attractiveness of countries with weak currencies for investors and all that, well, at least not right away. Besides, it's not the relative weakness of the ruble that plays a big role in the lives of ordinary Russians, but its instability and unpredictability. And here we will look at it through a historical lens. In 1316, the Tver prince Mikhail Yurievich defeated the Novgorodians in a regular feud and extracted a tribute of 5,000 rubles from them. This is the first mention of the Russian ruble in the chronicles, so it is at least 700 years old. Historians believe that the ruble is the world's oldest national currency after the British pound. During this time, Russia has changed its social system and form of government, symbols and borders, moved its capital, waged wars and uprisings, and carried out hundreds of reforms, while the ruble remains its unchanged key attribute. But here's the paradox. In 7 centuries it never became strong. Why? The ruble as a coin was first issued in a centralized and standardized manner in 1654 under Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich. However, there were problems immediately. There wasn't enough silver in the country, so they used German Joachim Stahler's, placing the double-headed eagle right on top of them. That's the ruble for you. Just 2 years later, Russia faced inflation for the first time. In 1656, the government decided to deal with the lack of money supply by issuing 1 and 5 kopeck coins made of Ural copper. However, they went overboard. In 6 years, they minted more than 20 million rubles. Prices skyrocketed instantly. People were particularly outraged by the fact that the authorities demanded that taxes be paid in silver, while the then state employees were paid in copper, although the market gave 28 rubles in copper for 1 ruble in silver. In 1662, a copper riot even broke out in Moscow, after which copper coins had to be urgently removed from circulation. Next, rulers continued to experiment with money. Peter the Great called the small silver kopecks old lies and banned them, again replacing them with copper ones. Catherine II introduced paper assignations, but that only made things worse. The country ended up with 2 parallel currencies. By the end of her reign, the paper ruble was worth 68 kopecks in silver, and after the war with Napoleon, only 20. As Saltykov-Shchedrin joked about exchange rates in 1881, soon in Paris you'll be able to exchange your ruble only for a punch in the face. Here's a way to get a sense of inflation. Back in the 18th century, a chicken cost a kopeck, which was about what a carpenter made in a day. You could buy a peasant hut for 3 rubles. Then, right before World War I, a cow cost 25 rubles and a village house 100 rubles. In general, even in the mighty empire, the ruble remained vulnerable. By the time the revolutions of 1917 happened, the ruble had finally fallen and wasn't even considered a reliable way to settle things. At one point, Yakutia even introduced an alternative currency – wine labels. They valued Madeira at 1 ruble, Cahors at 10 and port wine at 25 rubles. Well, in the first years of Soviet power, it only got worse. I mean, they were building a communist society where money are not needed. As for the gold, Grandpa Lenin promised to decorate public toilets with it. But he still issued his own currency instead of the ruble, the sovznak, a Soviet token with a 1-to-1 exchange rate to the ruble, which was depreciating at a breakneck speed. It got to the point where a box of matches cost 1 million sovznaks, and salaries were handed out in sacks of money. You could lose half of your salary just by carrying your sack from work. The redenomination had to be carried out multiple times a year. Basically, the only way out of this steep dive was a complete reboot. In 1924, the new Soviet ruble was presented to the public. It was declared a unified currency for payments throughout the territory of the USSR, and the currency was linked to gold. This finally led to the currency rate stabilizing, and it looked like the Soviet ruble was about to thrive. But then, new challenges appeared. If we boil it all down, the Soviet ruble's external problems were that the USSR was a very closed country, and nobody outside the USSR needed the ruble. The Soviet authorities were well aware of this. Even at the height of industrialization, when the USSR was spending a lot of money on imports, they never tried to use the Soviet ruble to pay their trading partners for Soviet exports. Foreign trade was only done in the currencies of capitalist countries or by barter. Moreover, the gold content of the ruble was completely theoretical, and the USSR could not and was not going to exchange its currency for gold. Accordingly, the ruble exchange rate against world currencies was actually set by the government as it saw fit. So the ruble was a currency for domestic use only, but it was also treated with suspicion inside the country. The generation of the 1930s did not trust the government much and tried to hide old gold and silver coins. The authorities responded harshly with confiscations. Then there was the reform of 1947, which was basically a way to get rid of the extra money that had been accumulated during the war. The next reform of 1961 wasn't even called a reform, it was just a formality. It was 10 rubles and then it became a ruble. It was simpler and more convenient because prices were lowered tenfold and so were wages. The dollar exchange rate, however, was changed 4 times, not 10. It went from 4 rubles per dollar to 0.91. So actually, the reform came with a big devaluation of the ruble to boost the budget replenishment from the export of raw materials. We'll come back to this simple scheme later. However, people did not notice it right away. There was no free currency conversion 60 years ago, and the rise in prices associated with redenomination was partially disguised, but only partially. The famous riot and shooting in Novocherkassk in 1962 occurred precisely because of the price increase associated with the monetary reform. The main blow to the reputation and trust in the ruble was, of course, caused by the turbulent 90s. See for yourself. In 1991, without warning, the 50 and 100 ruble banknotes were suddenly taken out of circulation. You could exchange them for smaller bills and new banknotes, but only for 3 days. But there's more. You could change a maximum of 1000 rubles and withdraw a maximum of 500 from a deposit. If you didn't have time or didn't meet the limits, that's too bad. It was basically a daylight robbery of its own citizens, a last-ditch effort to save the failing USSR economy. The government had 2 options to plug the hole in the budget: take about 80 million rubles from citizens or raise prices by about 4 times. The government decided that the first option would cause less anger. Well, first of all, it didn't. Secondly, they miscalculated how effective it would be. In just 1.5 months, they still had to raise prices by the same amount, 3 to 4 times. Alright, fine, the USSR collapsed. Maybe now the new Russian ruble will earn the trust of citizens. Not a chance. The very first reform of 1993, the replacement of Soviet rubles with Russian rubles. Since July 26, 1993, Soviet rubles ceased their circulation on the territory of the Russian Federation. People were allowed to exchange them for Russian rubles, but only within 10 days and up to 35,000 per person. That was about $35, by the way, less than an average monthly salary in the country. If you had more than that, you could leave it in Sberbank for 6 months without being able to take out any of it, and inflation would eat it up. Enjoy! In comparison with all these, the great and terrible default of 1998 and the redenomination of the ruble 1000 times don't look as bad. The standard of living fell, but at least people were allowed to exchange all their money for new ones. Obviously, there was still nothing good. Yesterday you had a salary of 2 million rubles, then you woke up this morning, you had 2000 rubles. This didn't exactly give people a lot of confidence in the ruble. During the 3 weeks of the crisis, it fell more than 3 times to 20 rubles per dollar, and it hasn't been quoted at a higher rate since. So today people still have this idea in their heads that if you want to keep your savings, buy whatever you want. Buy gold, buy apartments, buy dollars, invest in shares, buy buckwheat futures. Just don't keep anything in rubles. If you hear some bad news, sell your rubles right away and exchange them for anything. Don't wait. And don't believe the government and banks. In mid-January 1991, the head of the USSR State Bank Gerashenko swore on his life that there wouldn't be any exchange of banknotes. The exchange was announced on January 22nd. On Friday, August 14th, 1998, President Yeltsin said, "There will be no devaluation. This I declare firmly and clearly." 3 days later, on Monday, default and devaluation were ordered. The 20th century in Russia was a wild ride for the ruble. It went through 2 hyperinflations, 4 monetary reforms, and 2 redenominations. And even with all the geopolitical craziness in the 21st century, nothing like that has happened yet. Sure, there have been local crises, sanctions and isolation, but nothing compared to civil wars and revolutions. And the change from 20 to 80 rubles per dollar isn't 1,000 times. Nevertheless, the ruble still does not inspire much confidence among external investors or the public. It's still seen as a weak currency. Why? It's simple. Remember what I said about 1961, that the devaluation of the ruble increases revenues from the export of raw materials. Today it's the same. Companies that sell goods for dollars make more profit when the ruble is weak. Russian companies have 80 to 90% of their production costs in rubles. Accordingly, when the ruble weakens, costs in terms of dollars fall, and as a result, Russian exported products become more competitive. So, the cheaper the ruble is, the better it is for exporting companies. Now we remember that oil and gas exports account for almost 50% of Russia's budget revenues. Most of Russia's major exporters are either state-owned companies or directly linked to the state, and we get a simple conclusion. The Russian state benefits from a weak ruble. For regular people, a weaker ruble means higher prices for imported goods, but let's be real, who cares? If the ruble is strong, there'll be less money in the budget. Of course, the government has to keep a balance so the ruble doesn't become too cheap and prices don't become too unaffordable for people. But the government's priority is clear: to replenish the budget, not to ensure a strong ruble. You can see this by looking at the state media. When the ruble exchange rate goes up or down a lot, they publish articles and stories saying that a weak ruble isn't so bad, it's even beneficial. However, they neglect to mention that it's beneficial for the state and large companies. For regular people, not so much. So, you are probably waiting for a straightforward answer from me. Why the ruble is a weak and unstable currency, and what does history have to do with all that? And I got one. The ruble is weak not because Russia's economy is bad, not because it is doomed in itself, but because it is not trusted, neither by citizens, nor by investors, nor even by the state itself. And why are they distrustful? Because history has proven time and time again that trusting the ruble means taking a risk. The ruble has always, almost all of its 700-year history, been a tool for solving the problems of those in power, rather than protecting the savings of citizens. Need more silver for the treasury? Let's make copper rubles and have people pay in silver. Need to show that old money are worthless and are a relic of tsarism? We'll exchange them for our new money at the rate of million to one. If we want to show that our socialist ruble is stronger than the capitalist dollar, we can. We'll set an artificial rate of 60 to 90 kopecks per dollar, even though it should be closer to 5 to 10 rubles. A hole in the budget? We'll take rubles from the people and freeze their deposits. Need to ensure the benefit of large exporters? Let's make the ruble as dependent on the oil price as possible, keep it within the necessary limits and explain to the population that it is for their own good. As a result, people don't trust the ruble. The country's population uses it in everyday life, but no one keeps large savings in it. Even the ruble exchange rate's fluctuations in March 2022 were caused by the population's lack of confidence, not external factors. Everyone was rushing to sell rubles and buy anything – dollars, electronics, cars, tickets to other countries, thinking there'd be another crisis. Other parties' attitude to the ruble is no better. External partners use it mostly involuntarily, potential investors are afraid not only of sanctions but also of the ruble's instability. As I have already said, even economic experts cannot predict how it will behave. And for the state itself, stability and a high ruble exchange rate are far from being a priority. But does this lack of trust mean that the ruble is a bad currency for Russia? Not at all. The Russian ruble and its exchange rate are great tools. Thanks to their flexibility and manageability, the Russian central bank has made sure that the incredible pressure of unprecedented sanctions on the Russian economy did not lead to such catastrophic consequences as it could have. However, it is still quite difficult to live when your money are so unpredictable. Thanks for watching! And as always, a huge shout out to my biggest supporters: Yelizaveta Zakharova, Kirill Klimuk, Simon Böse, Jimmy Albin, Petar Ilic and Marina Holiday. See you guys next time!